Alright guys, how's everyone doing? Kalzain back with another video. And today we're going to do my first impressions of the Destiny 2 beta, my thoughts. I've spent the last couple days playing it. I wanted to give it a little bit of a chance before I made this video. I'm going to go a little bit in depth on my thoughts on the PvP, the new strike, and the story mode. And then I'm going to go into my thoughts on the loot system and guns. And we'll go from there. So, for the story mode, aside from some massively gaping plot holes and some, just really lack of story on the character aspect, which is something that was wrong with Destiny 1, after the Taken King expansion, when they made your character mute, not really have a personality, that kind of takes away from the compelling, engaging aspect of having your own character. And I was really hoping going into Destiny 2 they would give your character personality and give them a voice again, but they didn't do that. So that was one of the things that when you're having this heated moment and your character's sitting there mute through the whole thing, it really takes away from the drama of that situation. Now, aside from that, I really liked the campaign mission. I think it was a lot more engaging. There was more to it. It was a pretty decent length. And overall, it had a much better feel than a lot of what Destiny 1 did. And it was very reminiscent to me of the first mission in the Taken King expansion where you go to Phobos. That was one of the best missions in Destiny 2, or in Destiny 1. And I will say that most of the Taken King missions were really solid in their approach. And it seems like Destiny 2 is taking on some of that while expanding on it and making it better and more cinematic, and I'm all for that. Now, this is the first mission, so we'll have to wait and see what the rest of the game's like. But if it follows suit, then we're going to have a really compelling story going into Destiny 2, and that is something that's been much needed for the series, and I would really love to see that, continue on. So that's really all I have to say on the story aspect. So we're going to move over to the strike, which is by far, I would say, the biggest downside to the beta, and really I know it's the beta and this stuff's all subject to change, so, take all this with a grain of salt, but the new strike really emphasized all the fears that most people had about the new weapon system and going into PvE. The boss was a major bullet sponge, and the last damage phase on the boss fight was ridiculous. After you basically pop the dude's head off, and he comes rolling in, barreling around, and he does that stomp that blows you all the way off the map. That was the most ridiculous part of the boss fight. It instantly went from being a challenging yet interesting boss fight to a very frustrating pain in the ass when you have him down almost dead and you have to wipe and start over. It has been the biggest problem I've seen with the Destiny 2 beta, and really kind of confirms a lot of what I was anticipating going into Destiny 2's PvE in total. The damage output is much lower, but it didn't seem like the boss's health was reconfigured to accommodate the new weapon system. So, in terms of DPS, you really don't have a whole lot of damage potential, but on the bright side, some of the subclass abilities do kind of counterset that, because the strike was paced just right to where you got about 3, maybe 4 supers. So you use one, like the way I've been doing it is I used one going into the area going into the mining complex, where you have the big launcher that takes you into the room. So outside you have to activate the 2 terminals to get over to the other side. That area is a perfect spot to do one of your supers and really take down a bunch of enemies. Pick up some orbs of light, have your super almost recharged. When you hop across to the other side, usually within a few minutes, you can get another super in that area and really tear it up. And then I saved the last one for the last damage phase of the boss, because that was really the spot in the boss fight where, right where you're at the very end, when he's almost dead, that's when you need to pop your super. And I would say probably the 3 most useful supers for that engagement are Dawnblade, Sentinel, and Gunslinger. Dawnblade and Gunslinger, because you can damage the boss from range and you don't have to worry about getting stomped. You have a chance to evade. And Sentinel because you can use the Ward of Dawn, which is by far the most important thing in that boss fight because it keeps you guys alive as long as you stay in the bubble and jump at the right times and avoid the stomps. That can really be a make or break scenario there. But those are the three most useful for the strike. But the problem is I see those being the three most useful for all of PvE. I don't anticipate Voidwalker might be useful for some small skirmishes, but for big boss damage, I think you're going to be better off going with the Dawn Blade. And Arc Strider and Striker are really only good for ad clearing, and that's about it. So when it comes to boss DPS, the only ones you can really depend on for that extra damage is the Golden Gun and the Dawn Blade. Now, the Sentinel makes a great support class because you can either use it to clear ads or you can use the Ward of Dawn and really have a good buffer for doing a damage phase and being able to shield you from taking damage. So, the PvE aspect, I think, is really suffering from the new weapon changes because you just don't have the same damage output. You don't get enough power weapon ammo, and you just simply don't do enough damage with the kinetic and energy weapons. So this is something that I know a lot of people were anticipating being a problem. This is the beta, and this is subject to change, and I hope that Bungie does balance this a little bit better. But the other biggest problem, I think, is the recharge time on your abilities, on your melee and grenades in PvE. I understand them toning them down for PvP, and that's one thing. But toning all that stuff down for PvE, I think, really takes away from that. I mean, you can still have ability spamming in PvE, because that is where it's fun to ability spam, and it makes sense because it's not ultra competitive. It's meant to be challenging, but not... There's challenging when it feels rewarding and it feels hard, and there's challenging to where it's scaled so difficult it's just frustrating, and that frustrating challenge is not the kind of challenge that you want. You want that it's a struggle, but it was a hard fight, but you were able to win. Not one that you make it all the way to the very end and then get wrecked real fast and then get frustrated and get mad and then you have problems. So we'll see how the rest of PvE plays out in Destiny 2 when the full game launches, but this is something I see as a major problem if it's not fixed. The players simply either they need to scale the bosses' HP down and their defenses down to accommodate not having as much DPS, or really increase the DPS potential by either buffing the power weapons in PvE or allowing for more ability spamming. So that's going to do it for the strike. I mean, aside from that, it was a pretty well-rounded strike. It wasn't too long. It had a nice pace to it, except for the boss fight, and that's the biggest issue with it. So now we're going to jump over the PvP aspect, which is where I have the most mixed feelings. I think the gunplay feels significantly better than it did in Destiny 1. To an extent, in one-on-one engagements, or even 1v2 engagements, if you're good, you can survive those pretty easily. If you have a good steady shot and you're nailing those crits, you'll be fine. Now, anything more than 2 players, you're pretty much doomed from the moment you step out, and that's it. You're going to get team shot. And this has been even... I'm surprised that with 4v4 and having less people that team shot is a problem. I think it has a lot to do with the Endless Veil map, which is by far one of my least favorite maps that Bungie has ever created. I just absolutely don't like the map. I don't like the layout of it or the feel of it. And the way it pushes you into really tight corridors and stuff where you turn a corner and have 3 people waiting for you and just wreck you the moment you turn a corner, it's frustrating, especially if you're trying to play in a solo queue. So, you know, that was one of the lower, or the map was one of the biggest aspects of it. And I have to say I love the Midtown map, but I don't like the countdown gameplay, or game mode. I think it's way too slow. And that's the problem. You got countdown, which is way too slow, takes way too long, and can be really boring, especially if you get taken out right away by a team shot. Then you're just sitting there waiting around. But the map is really solid. Then you got control, which the time, like the length of the game mode is way too short. 8 minutes is way too short. I think it needs to be 10 or 12 personally. So you got a too short game mode, and you have a bad map, but you have a more fast-paced gameplay. So you got this balancing act going on in the PvP between the competitive side and the casual side that's really not balancing out. where you've got the competitive game mode that really isn't being taken all that competitively and turns into a boring snooze fest if you don't have a bunch of people that are really coordinated and really working as a team. If everyone's solo queuing, it's very boring because it's very slow paced. Then you have the faster paced casual game mode, which is meant to be less sweaty and more casual, and you have people going in and really doing a lot of team shotting and really doing very strong coordination in their teams, and it really offsets that balance. So it really doesn't feel like a casual game mode as much as it does. It's more a different type of competitive than your competitive, what you got with Countdown. So that's going to be, I see that as a problem if they don't kind of fix some of that. So I think the biggest thing that Bungie needs to do in terms of PvP for the game modes in particular, lengthen the game modes and fix the pacing. And when I say fix the pacing, I mean that the gunplay is fine. I do say that certain weapons need a buff, like I think that, and I won't say that pulse rifles need a nerf. I think they're fine how they are, but they are by far the meta of the beta. And I think that scout rifles need a buff. I think hand cannons need a slight buff. And I think auto rifles need a bit of a range buff and maybe a stability buff. Not necessarily a damage buff because they're in a really good spot. And submachine guns need a massive stability buff. The recoil is way too high. If you're at any kind of range at all, they're bordering on worthless. And the only thing they're good for right now is cleanup kills or rushing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the stability on them limits what you can do with them, and especially in the PvE environment, they're really not useful anywhere. And the same with sidearms. Sidearms fall in that same category. They're great for rushing, not very good for distance gameplay. So that's a big problem. The weapons really are not balanced, and I really don't like this new setup with static perks and the perk trees being so limited to such a small confined amount of perks. Now, where the trade-off with that will be, because you got one or two options here is what Bungie's going to do. You either have the weapon mods, which will add an extra perk tree or perk area into your tree on a weapon. So maybe you have mods for stability, range, and aim assist. And then you have a static perk like you do with the, you have like luck in the chamber, full auto, things like that as your static perk that's on the weapon. That might be a way to balance that. Or if they're not going to increase the amount of perks you have with the weapon mods, then what they have to do is they have to take all of those perks and put them on different weapons and have just a massive amount of weapons. Otherwise, this is going to go a lot like Destiny 1 did with a very strong meta. The problem is it won't just be a pulse rifle meta, it'll be a specific type of pulse rifle, and then everything else in the game will be garbage by comparison and will never get used, and that's going to take more than stat tweaking to fix. So, I think that the weapons do need some changes, but I think in overall the weapon feel is very good. I would still prefer to see Bungie go more a route like with what Halo 5 did, and take away the recoil and really like take away the recoil but take away the aim assist and make it run like a PC shooter on console. I think that that's why Halo's PvP is so fun. But I'm going to say this like because I know Bungie's distancing themselves from Halo from their past, and they're kind of bringing some of it back but kind of keeping their distance and trying to make Destiny 2 unique. But I would say look at what 343 Industries did with Halo 5's multiplayer, because Halo 5's multiplayer is by far the best PvP experience I think I've had in any first-person shooter, and Destiny comes second. But I think there's a lot of things they could learn from it. Map layout, map sizing, spawning locations, and weapon handling. Those are all things that they can learn from Halo's, what they've done strong, because Halo has some of the best maps. Halo 5 specifically has some of the best maps, the best spawning locations, the best viewpoints, and they really have spots on their maps that accommodate all kinds of playstyle. You have long range openings, you have choke points, you have, very open areas, and then you have very close quarters. And I think that maps with all of those things going on that have all of those different accommodations for every playstyle offer a lot more variety of how people can play. The biggest problem with the Endless Veil map is it forces everyone into close quarters, and really doesn't have any sniping locations and really makes it a difficult map to play on if you prefer a more distance play style. And last but not least, on the PvP aspect, I think that what they need to do is fix the ability spamming. Okay, because it was one thing to nerf the damage on grenades and melees when you were getting them so frequently. Now you have a thing where you're not getting them at all, and they're really not nearly as strong as they used to be. So they need to do one of two things: either speed up the refresh time on it, so that way you get them more frequently and keep the damage where they're at, or increase the damage on them slightly and then keep the speed of the recharge where it's at, so you don't get them as frequently, but they are more useful and they are a lot harder hitting. The melees, I think that this is another thing where I'm gonna go back to Halo. It should be one to the front, or two to the front, and one to the back for a melee. Three melees is too much. It ruins any kind of CQC, unless you're rocking a sidearm or a submachine gun. So CQC in Destiny 2 is pretty much non-existent. No one's going to get in melee throwdowns because the only person that's going to win is whoever hits first, and it's going to be just a slow slug out until then. And that's a problem in terms of close quarters mechanics, because I'm not saying that you should have one hit every time you melee someone, because a lot of the times when I end up meleeing people is when I come around a corner and they're right there, and it's like a reflex thing as we run into each other. So I would like to see it more, even if it's just two to the front, two to the back. Two is better than three. I think three is just too slow. So that's my thoughts on those. And then when it comes to the supers, I noticed that a lot of people aren't getting their supers until, at the earliest, it seems like the last 3 minutes of a match, which really takes away from that super effect of having that super. I mean, it gives you a last minute turnaround on some events. I mean, like Clash, I can see that being it's tight all the way to the end, and then you have a last minute turnaround, or everyone holds on to their supers until the last bit and then just dominates. And while that is an okay strategy, I don't think it's the best way to handle it. I think what they really need to do is have the recharge rate a lot faster during the first half of the match, so that way if you're getting solid kills, or at least doing trades and things like that, you should be able to get your super by the middle of the match, and then have it after you get your first super, slow down the recharge rate, so that way only, like, maybe if you're like god level playing, like you're an MLG pro, maybe get two supers in a match. But I think that having it more in the middle of the match is going to allow people to strategize around their supers a little bit better. And I think it'll make it less of one chaotic cluster at the end of the match. So these are my thoughts on the beta. I'm really enjoying the PvP, and I really hate the strike. But I'm having very mixed feelings. I try to keep in mind that it is just a beta and that a lot of this probably will change by the full release. But when I see so many things that were fears and concerns when they've announced all this stuff, and you've had so many people addressing their fears and concerns, and then the beta comes out and it is the living enactment of every single one of those fears and nightmares coming true, it raises a lot of red flags for a lot of people. And I think a lot of Destiny 1 fans will agree on some of this. I think some of them will see it as a welcome change because it's not all ability spams, and I'm fine with that. I don't think it should be all ability spams, but I think the pacing of PvP is either too fast or too slow, and I think there should be a nice middle ground option there. And I definitely think that something needs done about the weapons in PvE and PvP. But PvE needs some serious buffs if it's going to be as engaging. Otherwise, it's just going to be frustrating and no one's going to want to do it. And I can see, unless they have an absolute ton of weapons, I can see people getting burnt out on Destiny 2 really, really quick. So, these are just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think down below. If you're enjoying the beta, if you think that everything is great, let me know. If you have other concerns, let me know, and maybe I'll address them in a future video, something I missed. But that's going to do it for this one. I just wanted to let you guys know how I was feeling after playing the beta for a few days. and looking forward to Destiny 2. And by getting these thoughts out there, it's the best way for Bungie to hear them and make the changes people want to see before Destiny 2 comes out for the full release on September 6th. So if you like the video, guys, go ahead and hit that like button down below. Subscribe so you can stay up to date on everything I upload here on the channel. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you all later, and I will see you in the next one.